Prior to tonight's meeting, we'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Waddington, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'd first like to ask for a moment of silence for 17th term Congressman John Lewis, who carried the struggle against racial discrimination. He died recently, July 17th. God our Father, as we gather for this meeting this evening, give us the guidance and wisdom to make the proper decisions. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Spriggs, will you call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Poole?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Ms. Twine?
Here.
Mr. Meinzer?
Here.
Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes from our meeting of July 13th, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the July 13th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Once again, we're holding this Sandusky Commission meeting electronically. Commissioners and staff are in attendance to an internet hookup in a variety of safe locations. We've asked our audience to either submit their questions or their comments in writing to our commission clerk, and we will answer those that pertain to legislation as that legislation comes before us, as well as provide a response to any other audience questions from the appropriate staff. I would also like to acknowledge the fact that those participating in this meeting are doing so with the appropriate social distancing and face masks as it is required. Ms. Spriggs, are there any questions from the public that pertain to tonight's agenda items?
Yes, sir. We have 3 questions pertaining, or from 3 people pertaining to tonight's agenda. The first is from Marie Hawk. It's pertaining to item number 2. She said, "My concern for the meeting Monday, July 27, 2020, is the issue concerning buying property above market value for a project which is several years away. Why does the AMVETS property need to be purchased now? I don't think there is anyone else out there who is going to step in and buy that property. So why wait until the city is in better financial position to purchase it? Possibly by waiting, the city will come up with a less expensive way to meet the need for a holding tank for the Mill Street high rate treatment project. It actually appears as though this has more to do with the following. In quotes, acquiring this property would allow for the flexibility of locating a consolidated public park near the Sandusky Bay Pathway and the Shelby Street boat ramp with views of the water park," end quote, quoted from the City Commission agenda. I realize the Commission does need to look down the road, but I believe at this time the concerns should be mostly about how the city is going to weather the current financial situation.
Thank you. We'll address those. Excuse me, you have more?
I do. I have several more.
Okay.
The next is from Mr. Tim Schwanger. In relation to item number 2, the purchase of property from World War II American veterans on Putnam Street. The 3-acre site is appraised at $91,490 by the Erie County Auditor. The supporting documents do not appear to indicate recent appraisals for the property. Has the city contracted with appraisal companies for an updated appraisal to justify the $190,000 price? $63,000 per acre seems excessive, and in this time of Sandusky's financial struggles, the purchase price should be renegotiated. Then on item number 3, he asked the .4 acre site is appraised by the county auditor at $24,000 total, $12,400 for each lot. The auditor's webpage is not clear on whether the current owners paid $42,000 for each lot, totaling $84,000, or $42,000 total for both lots combined in 2005. The proposed purchase price from the development department is $70,000. The supporting documents do not appear to include recent appraisals for the property. Other similar sized lots in Sandusky are priced at a fraction of the cost. If purchased by the city, is their intent to recoup the $70,000 through resale. The city should not be in the real estate business speculating future residential development. If there is interest in this property for future residential development, allow the current owners to negotiate a sale with potential buyers, and the city should negotiate with potential buyers for property the city currently owns adjacent to the Franklin and East Market Street properties. And then one final, so this is from Ms. Sharon Johnson. Pertaining to item number 2, the city is buying the Ambets property for $190,000, which is coming out of the sewer funds. The sewer balance at the end of June was down to $138,000. How is there enough funding in the sewer fund to cover this expense? And finally, on item number 3, why is the city buying lots for someone else instead of the interested parties buying their own lots directly from the realtor? And why does the city think it is obligated to pick up the expense of an alleyway for future residential living?
Those questions will be addressed as we get to the specific legislation. Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have no consent agenda items to consider this evening. Therefore, we will turn directly to the 5 items on our regular agenda. Ms. Spriggs, I wonder if you would present item number 1.
Yes, President Brady. Item number 1 is an ordinance approving a pricing schedule addendum to the customer supply agreement with Energy Harbor LLC, formerly known as First Energy Solutions Corporation of Akron, Ohio, for the electric service for the city's largest accounts located in the city of Sandusky for the period of June 2021 to June 2025, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second. Second.
There have been a motion and a second discussion. I, as most of you have done, have read this legislation and find that it's somewhat of a no-brainer. It simply means that we'll be saving several thousands of dollars by simply going to a cheaper rate. I can understand why there would be no discussion about that. My only comment about that is that all of us have to pay utility bills, and it seems all of us begrudge doing that. So anytime that we get a break of this magnitude of several thousand dollars, we're thankful and thrilled for that. Any additional discussion, Commissioners? Ms. Briggs?
Chairman?
Commissioner Harris?
Meinzer? Mine, yeah.
Commissioner
Just a
Meinzer.
quick question. I should have brought that up earlier. This is the harbor is a part of First Energy, but do the residents of the city have this same break? I know we negotiate some sort of contract with them at some point in the year.
Perhaps Trevor could.
I don't know.
Perhaps Trevor could
Through
speak
you,
to that.
Mr. Whoopser.
Or Mr. Whoopser can speak to that?
Yes, through you.
Trevor.
Through the, I can handle it.
Go ahead, Trevor.
I can handle it. Through you, Commissioner President, to Commissioner Meiser. Yes, the residents do have a separate agreement. We have, the city essentially has like 3 agreements. One is for just our properties, which is what we're talking about today. One is the consolidation, and then a third is natural gas. We were brought this one because the rates were so much better that Tom Bellish from Buckeye Energy wanted us to jump on board while the rates were so low. That's why we're moving on this one. But if something like, he does also keep watch for the citizens as well. So if something like that was available for them, he would tell us and let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aberger. Additional discussion? Ms. Spriggs, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Yes. Mr. Waddington,
Yes.
Mr. Poole,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Brady,
Yes.
Ms. Twine,
Yes.
and Mr. Meinzer.
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Poole,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Brady,
Yes.
Ms. Twine,
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer.
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Spriggs, you present item number 2, please.
Item number 2 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for the purchase of real property located north of West Adams Street between Putnam Street and Harrison Street, Sandusky, and identified as parcel number 59-01-355.000, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and a second. Discussion. This particular piece of legislation deserves some explanation, and I think we have I have 2 people queued up to speak to it. Both our director of engineering, Mr. Klein, would speak to the need for the property, and perhaps Mr. Lasko can speak to the mechanics of the purchase. So I would ask Mr. Klein to lead us off and tell us what exactly the need for that property is.
Sir, hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm kind of losing my voice. Let me know if you can't. But I can certainly, through you, Mr. President, I can certainly address the need of the property, and then I'll defer to Mr. Lasko and Ms. Rieger as well to answer the questions from the public. As far as the need, this dates back to 2014 when the city started to renegotiate our long-term control plan with Ohio EPA. We finalized that agreement by approving 5 different projects. 2 are completed, 2 are almost complete, which are the improvements at Pier Track and Farwell lift stations. And the final project is the high rate treatment project at the end of Mill Street. That project is supposed to be located within the wastewater treatment plant or in that vicinity. And right now, the way it stands, we don't have very much space. There is space out there, but to do a 16 million gallon high rate treatment project, just to put it into perspective, that's basically just a big tank that holds water. That rainwater then gets treated through a very quick treatment process, so it doesn't have to go through the entire water treatment plant, and then it can be discharged. So it's a very quick treatment process that the EPA is allowing for that first flush of heavy rainfall. And the size of that tank, the 16 million gallon tank, would be the first phase. They're also hoping to push 2 additional phases of 8 million expansions in the future. Each one of these projects is about $1 million per million gallons. So this first project ranges between 12 and 16 million. The two future projects range about $1 million apiece. So we're doing everything we can to try to eliminate the future projects and reduce the project that we would be moving forward with. And to put that size of a tank in perspective, if we are looking at a 20-foot deep tank, that would be into bedrock a certain distance, and you would still be at a diameter of about 120 to 125 yards. So that's not a small piece of property that we need, and it has to be in the general vicinity of the wastewater treatment plant. So since 2014, when we were finalizing the agreement, we had in the back of our mind that we would love if the AMVETS property ever came up for sale. There's not much room that we can move to the south because of Sprout Park, but we also realize that utilizing that baseball field that AMVETS owns might not be the ideal location for a 123 yard diameter tank that would be blocking the views and everything else. So our goal all along would be to acquire that property if it were to become available, and then do more of a planning process to figure out how things would work in that area, so we don't just drop it in and destroy that neighborhood over there as well. That planning process and that request for qualifications, we had intended to put that out on the street at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, meaning we would also include the negotiations for right-of-way acquisition and all of the position of property and whatever else is needed to make sure that we could complete the project. The fact that this came online now couldn't have been better timing for the city and for this project. Not only is it if this gets approved, it would be under our control, but we wouldn't have to pay those additional services. And the last thing I would say is that we also, as the last project as part of our Brownfields grant that we applied for a couple years ago, it expires in September, we were able to complete the phase 1 on this property and do our due diligence to make sure that we were acquiring something that was clean and free of any environmental contamination. So with that being said, I can turn it over to Director Lasko right now to speak on behalf of the appraisal and the cost of the property, if you'd like, President Brady.
Perfect. Mr. Lasko, I wonder if you can speak to the mechanics of the purchase.
Absolutely, Mr. President, members of the commission, and hopefully I will be able to address some of the questions or all the questions that were raised by the public. But I appreciate Director Klein for providing the need and the backdrop for the property. And just to start off, I know there were questions, a lot of questions surrounded the valuation of the property. And I would just say to start, I certainly have the utmost respect for our county auditor, but there is a large difference between auditor appraised valuation for tax purposes versus market rate valuation for arm's length transactions, which this is. It is accurate that we do have an appraisal that we secured from R.A. Reynolds and Associates for $140,000. But what I would mention, it wasn't ready for the time of the appraisal that we have. But just a few yards east, the old Sarico property at 916 West Water Street just sold on July 21st for $250,000 for 4 acres, which is approximately $62,500 per acre. If you translate that to the just over 3 acres that we're proposing to purchase here, that would put a proposed valuation of $187,500. which is very, very close to the $190,000 being proposed this evening. Add to that, we know we're getting a clean site from an environmental standpoint, whereas we know the Sarico site has many underlying environmental issues that need dealt with. I would state as well, this property is currently for sale with the local real estate brokerage, and it is generating interest at the moment. It was listed for $300,000, and there is interest in the property. Now, whether that property would ever go under contract with another buyer, I could merely speculate. I don't know that was something that we at the staff level wanted to take the risk, that no one would purchase it, and we would be out the option of being able to purchase it directly from AMVETS without potentially having to pay a premium. So I did want to share that as well. With that said, fairly standard $190,000 purchase. As Aaron mentioned, we did do our due diligence already on the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, which did come back clean. So we'd generally be able to breeze through the due diligence period, although we are provided 30 days for us to do any other investigation that we see fit. There would be a traditional splitting of closing costs. And if approved, we would look to acquire the property near the tail end of August, with those funds to come from the sewer fund. And lastly, not to add one more person to the conversation, but I believe there was a question about the balance of the sewer fund, which I know Director Reeder is on with us this evening and is more than happy to comment on.
Excellent. Mr. Reeder, I wonder if you could comment on the solvency of our sewer fund and our ability to pay that $190,000 purchase price.
Sure. Through you, Commission President, the question I think was raised by Ms. Johnson. We have $6.9 million in the sewer fund as of the end of June. If you recall, we touched on this briefly for the Finance Committee. There's a difference between the cash balance and the unexpended balance. We have encumbrances of about $6.7 million at the end of June. Those encumbrances are promises that we made for purchases, but some of those are OWDA loans and grants. So it looks like an expenditure, but we'll get the revenue coming right back in. Our cash balance in the sewer fund is more than it was in June of 2019. So there's no issues with the fund being able to pay for this purchase of $190,000.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Reeder. That clarifies that issue of not being solvent enough to buy the property. Something I would like to point out is that that property is driven by an obligation that Mr. Klein shared with me that we have to complete the project we're talking about by 2024. So this is a timely acquisition. If we don't purchase the property or come up with this property or a property that's suitable for this use, I think we will be scrambling for a parcel that large within a range of where it has to be to be feasible to use. I know that it's never a good time during a pandemic to spend $190,000, but I think we would be woefully negligent if we miss this opportunity. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole.
for the engineer, you said that the structure was going to be 125 yards in diameter, or how does it fit on this property?
Through you, Mr. President, I was giving an example of an estimate. If it is a 20-foot high or deep tank, it would be 123 yards. If it's 30 feet, it would be 100 yards. Obviously, whatever we do out there, we will have to fit within the footprint that we own, and the design engineer will have to come up with that. We don't have the exact dimensions of the tank at this time, but we do know that we are looking at a 16 million gallon tank. So however we can design that and fit that out there, do that as economically as possible.
You also mentioned that when you were talking about the other future projects that we perhaps wouldn't have to do. How's that work into this purchase here, or whatever it is you're going to do?
Yes, sir. Through you, Mr. President. So that there's a few layers to that. The first thing that we're doing, if you recall, all the green infrastructure projects that we've been doing throughout the city, What those are intended to do is reduce the amount of stormwater that gets into our system. And the goal of those projects would be to reduce the amount of money that the EPA is trying to push on us in the future. One thing that we negotiated back in 2014 and 15 was to implement the first 5 projects and then reevaluate where we are as we're going through the process. That's also why we have a contract with Strand to update our sewer model, because we didn't have a very good model at the time. So we do have 2 other projects that we're trying to get a better understanding and a better knowledge of exactly where we stand now and where we're going to stand in 2025 when we have to start renegotiating with EPA. At that time, the goal would be to come up with more cost-effective projects. But what we do know is that the 16 million gallon is something that's definitely needed right now, and it's definitely required by EPA. And the goal would be to not have to expend the money on the future projects after this one.
Okay, so there's really no relationship between this project and the others, from what I took from what you said. I understand all the reasons for the projects. I'm just trying to tie it together from what you said earlier, that this project somehow or another made the others unnecessary. But that's okay. It would have been helpful if we had some footprint idea. I'm not certain that this can't be done on the Sproul Park area. It's difficult to make these kinds of decisions when we're getting word of mouth information that I've got 30 seconds to absorb and try and figure out if it makes any sense. But the $190,000, the property you spoke of, Mr. Lasco, the property that went for $200,000, where is that property at? I'm not sure what you're talking about when you gave the title of it.
Yes, through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole. It goes by various names, but just to the west of the Metal Tech facility is 4 acres of vacant land that's basically covered by hardscape. Again, just west of Metal Tech on the south side of Water Street. It's currently being marketed by Hody. That is what just sold for $250,000 on July 1st.
Okay, and do you know what they're going to do with it?
We don't know what they're going to do with it.
Okay.
It was purchased by Metal Tech.
What was it appraised at?
We don't know any existence of an appraisal on that property.
Okay, we have an appraisal on this property at $140,000. You've attempted to give the impression that somehow or another this property on the other side of the sewer plant is worth $60,000 or $40,000 more than it was appraised at, based on something that's a different kind of property to be used differently. And it's not that. That's enough said, gentlemen. I'll just pass. I'd appreciate, folks, if you give information that's of value in making a decision about this. There's no connection between what's going on Water Street that makes this property worth $40,000 more than the appraisal with what's been presented to us. But we may very well need the property as large as the tank is we're putting in. It looks like it won't fit on Sproul Park. It would have been helpful had we had that information ahead of time to evaluate it. So we'll just leave it at this.
Mr. Briggs, we pull the commission on the motion, please.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Brady,
Yes.
Ms. Twine,
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer.
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Briggs, will you present to us item number 3, please?
Yes, item number 3 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a purchase agreement for the purchase of real property located at 208 Franklin Street and 410 East Market Street and identified as parcel numbers 56-003480.000 and 56-00349.000, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Briggs, I wonder if you'd be so kind to read us the question that pertains to item number 3.
Yes. Ms. Johnson asked, why is the city buying lots for someone else instead of the interested parties buying their own lots directly from the realtor? And why does the city think it is obligated to pick up the expense of an alleyway for future residential living? And the other question was, the 0.4 acre site is appraised by the county auditor at $24,000 total, $12,400 each lot. The auditor's webpage is not clear on whether the current owners paid $42,000 for each lot, totaling $84,000, or $42,000 total for both lots combined in 2005. The proposed purchase price Development Department is $70,000. The supporting documents do not appear to include recent appraisals for the property. Other similar sized lots in Sandusky are priced at a fraction of that. If purchased by the city, is their intent to recoup the $70,000 through resale? The city should not be in the real estate business speculating future residential development. If there is interest in this property for future residential development, allow the current owners to negotiate a sale with the potential buyers, and the city should negotiate with potential buyers for property the city currently owns adjacent to the Franklin and East Market Street properties.
Thank you. Mr. Lasko, I wonder if you could provide some context for our strategy in this legislation.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. President. And I'll preface my comments with, certainly when I'm done speaking, if the city manager would want to add anything from sort of a planning and strategic planning, master planning standpoint in that area, I'd certainly welcome those comments from him as well. As put in my communication to Commission, we've been fortunate to have some pretty significant positive market activity, not only throughout the county, but obviously specifically in Sandusky. And once that market demand hits a certain point, it tips to where we start to see new construction happening at a greater scale. We're starting to see this in Cold Creek, obviously with the Water Street lofts, which are under construction and broke ground on phase 2 today. And this has led several individuals recently to call our office looking for land in and around the area of downtown. And as we know, with as dense of housing and buildings we have downtown, land is limited, but where we do start to see some green spaces just on the east side of downtown, around sort of the Warren East Market intersection, where the city does currently own about a 1 acre parcel at 430 East Market Street. As we started getting inquiries into that property, which is very large and could fit several single-family properties, we had discussions internally with the Planning Department and Public Works about trying to be thoughtful about how we may design new residential infill housing in that area as it relates to vehicular traffic, as it relates to pedestrian safety, et cetera, which led to the idea of looking and trying to accomplish rear access to infill housing in that area. that would result in one curb cut as opposed to as many as 5 on East Market Street. So with that in mind, I believe I included 2 exhibits, one that shows the existing parcel configuration in that block, a second one that shows a new configuration with our acre parcel and the 2 properties owned by Bill Siemens and his partner. So we would look to purchase those 2 properties for $70,000 and ultimately go through a replatting process, which was included in this communication to, in essence, expand and enlarge these 2 parcels to make them deeper, but to also then make them deeper to have access to what would be, or what is proposed to be, a newly constructed alley at the end of the 5 houses being constructed. We would then further subdivide our existing parcel into 3 additional properties. So the idea is to sort of master plan that block in a thoughtful way that would limit vehicular traffic and be cognizant of pedestrian safety. I do think it's worth mentioning, if this is approved tonight, we would go through with the purchase, ultimately quickly look to replat. We do have an offer already on the middle lot, which is Lot C, which would ultimately come to commission potentially as early as the end of August. That offer is for $39,400. And we also have had very detailed conversations on the 4 other lots. Assuming we were able to sell those for roughly $40,000 a piece, that would be $200,000, which would more than offset our costs of purchase of these 2 parcels and potential alley construction. I do want to answer a few questions. The first being, were the lots sold for $42,250 a piece, or was that jointly? That was a joint price back in 2005. We have seen significant appreciation downtown in terms of the cost of vacant land. And in this particular instance, although we've probably been more active in real estate development than some municipalities close to us, we do think it's necessary because as it comes to replatting and alley construction and the idea of easement placing along 5 properties that would share a common alleyway, that, in our opinion, becomes a nightmare from a planning and replatting standpoint, which is exponentially easier to do under common ownership. And we believe we can do it in a way that not just recoups our cost, but also bring in somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000 in additional revenue. With that, I don't know if the city manager would care to elaborate on any of those points.
Through the commission president to the commissioners, I think Matt did a very thorough job of explaining the details of this. I would just add a few things as it relates to why we would get involved, and Matt brought this up as well as it relates to being able to load these from the rear of the properties. In an urban context, you don't want to have driveways in the front of houses, and our master plan, which was adopted as part of the Bicentennial Vision Plan by the Commission in 2015, demonstrated clearly that in this area we looked to have housing facing Market Street, but with any access to garages to be behind the houses. This gives us an ability to control that, and as Matt said, it does it with a sensible plan to recoup those costs over time. In addition to that, we have seen a woeful amount of new construction housing in the heart of the city, infill new construction, and we are starting to see demand for that. We've worked very hard over the last several years to survey realtors and potential home buyers, and they're telling us that this is the type of product that they want, something that is within walking or biking distance of downtown in the context of an urban neighborhood. This is a real opportunity for us to stimulate that demand and hopefully spread it throughout the city. But outside of Cold Creek, obviously, we've seen a handful of non-Habitat for Humanity new construction homes in probably the last decade. This is an opportunity to do a handful within the next year and to grow from there.
Additional comments or questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Harris?
Yes, I think this just, goes to show, or is like a testament to, what the city has worked so hard for. And, building and developing downtown, now you begin to see, although it is very much so still downtown, but you begin to see that trickle down effect that we all hope to see, and we begin to get some of these, that infill in some of these neighborhoods, and hopefully from Market Street, you'll be able to begin to see, this infill and this new construction take place, perhaps on streets such as Perry Street and maybe even some other surrounding areas. But again, I think this is absolutely great. It goes to show you, that we're certainly headed in the right direction. So hopefully it continues.
Additional questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
just to, how deep is this alley?
Through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole. It's a 18-foot wide alley. It
Okay.
would span from lots A to E.
I see. What prevents an owner of the property from deciding they want to put a curb cut on the front? What do we have in place?
Through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole, that would have to go through the site plan process, through the Planning Commission and internal staff, so the city would have the ability to prohibit that from occurring.
Based on what? That you have the authority to tell people they can't put a driveway in the front of their house? What authority does that come from? Somewhere in the planet?
And if not, we could deed restrict the properties, which would be stronger than a Planning Commission ordinance. But we could easily deed restrict.
Could I get something from the law director on that issue?
Sorry, I was meaning to weigh in, but I was on mute. So this is Trevor, through you, Commission President, to Commissioner Poole. Obviously, any deed restrictions, I would prefer those would be between each person, and if we own some of the property, we can enforce it as well. But those have much more teeth to it than anything that we could throw together.
Okay, what's the easement, what's the access for lot split E? Well, let me back up. I assume that the easement A, B, C, and D going across, that the lots A, B, C, and D own those easements collectively or somehow that assures that D has access to the road?
Yes, through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole, the land that those easements sit on would be owned by each respective parcel. Heading eastward, each parcel would have easement rights through the parcels to the west. So E would have easement rights through A through D. That makes sense.
Okay, E is covered. They just don't need an easement. They just come off the back of their property across the other three.
That's correct.
Okay, what resolves obstructions to getting out? Having rights and having a clear path is two different things. How does that work out? If D wants to leave and B doesn't want to shovel snow, what happens?
I would defer to Trevor, but I believe that would be a civil matter. Not unlike what would happen with, for example, an HOA association that has common alleyways, parking areas, et cetera.
Trevor?
Through you, Commission President, to Commissioner Poole, I agree with Matt, and then on top of it, they all would have their own duty to clear it as well. I mean, E could go ahead and just clear all the way through. He doesn't need special permission from A, B, C, or D.
Okay, so then collectively, okay, all right. Thank you. And I bring this up because I recognize that anyone that's going to become a property owner in this area, it's going to have to be cooperative. Otherwise, I think this is a good idea. I've seen this design in other places like Myrtle Beach and so forth, and it can work very well as long as we work out the details ahead of time and make sure folks understand what they're getting into. Thank you.
Understood.
Mr. Briggs,
Thank you.
Go ahead. Ms. Briggs, do you poll the commission on the motion?
Yes, Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
And Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Briggs, will you present item number 4, please?
Item number 4 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with Ohio Telecom Incorporated of Port Clinton, Ohio, for the city-owned fiber extension to the Amtrak station for transit operations project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Stu, you get the easy ones. I call them easy ones when they cost us no money and they are such a dramatic improvement to the infrastructure. But why don't you just give us a Reader's Digest version of what we're doing here?
Through you, Mr. President. The transit station has always been a data island to us. It's the only location we have that we don't have fiber run to. A grant became available last year from ODOT for technology infrastructure. So we applied and received that. This originally was part of a larger project, but because of the times we're in now, we scaled the project back to only the $0 portion of the project that we can achieve right now. This will give us full connectivity out there, security systems, security doors, data, Wi-Fi, all the basic services you would expect in a city building.
Thank you, and it's all paid, it's 100% paid for by a grant.
100% paid for, the ones I like.
Good job, thank you.
Good.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? Ms. Briggs, will you poll the commission on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
And Mr. Meinzer?
Mike was off. Yes.
We got him, we'll woke him up. Now on the ordinance, please.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Briggs, you present item number 5, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Item number 5 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a First Amendment to the agreement for professional design services with LJB Incorporated of Fairview Park, Ohio, for the Warren Street reconstruction project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioner, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Chairman.
That be Commissioner Murray?
Yes. I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of our city's charter.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein, this is not a significant amount of money, but it is almost $20,000. I wonder if you can give the commission a breakdown on the 3 items that are driving this price upwards.
Certainly, Mr. President. The first item that we would be addressing is that the design consultants had in their contract to do 5 encroachments or license agreements for the contract as part of the project. Well, after going through the survey during the design process, they found out that we actually needed 8. So a large portion of this 20,000 is to do the legal descriptions, the additional survey work, and everything else that's needed for those 3 additional encroachment licenses. The second item that was additional as part of this contract is when we were going through the initial phases, we weren't sure exactly how we wanted the alignment at Elm Street and Warren to look. Right now, it comes in at a 5-point intersection, which is not very safe, especially near the park, and especially if we have a bike path coming through on the west side of the road. So that intersection at Elm would be reconfigured. As part of that, there would need to be additional design work outside of the Warren Street right-of-way, including some stormwater design so we don't flood out the property that the park is on, but more importantly, don't flood out the residents on the north side as well. And the last piece is that when we were going through the design of the sewer separation piece of this project, the contractor needed to clean the sewer so that it could be televised. That's something that it was a very small item, and it was something that needed to be done so they could proceed with the design work. Our goal is to get the project in a good enough shape that we can get a project budget so that we can look for outside funding sources in the upcoming year. So we wanted to make sure that we could proceed as quickly as possible with finalizing these items.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Spriggs, will you poll the commission on the motion, please?
Yes. Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
And Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. That concludes our regular agenda items. We will turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with donations. First, a thank you to resident Dave Broski, who made an in-kind donation of electrical supplies valuing $500. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion is approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks.
Moving on to new and old business, starting with the fire department. There were 20 rolls of old decommissioned fire hose that were donated to a Bruce Belsky from Farmington Hills, Michigan. Mr. Belsky makes American flags from worn-out fire hose. The donated hose has been deemed unrepairable and unserviceable, and thus he donated an American flag to the Andy Dunn Memorial Fund, and will donate an American flag to the Sandusky Fire Department. To see his flags, which are made from the old hose, you can visit Etsy.com under Fire Hose Flags. Moving on to the Public Works Department, due to COVID-19 requirements, staff has received a request from Sandusky Central Catholic to reverse the one-way traffic flow on Madison Street between Decatur and Jackson, so they can provide safe drop-off and pick-up accommodations. I know Jane Cullen from Aaron's department is working very closely with them to try to resolve issues so we can get that done for them, as well as interacting with other stakeholders, including Sandusky City Schools. In addition to that, staff plans to submit 3 applications for resurfacing to the Ohio Public Works Commission due on September 11th for construction after July of 21. More information will be forthcoming in August for approval to apply for and accept funds if awarded. The applications will include Warren Street from Water to Monroe, Camp Street from Perkins to Monroe, Barrett and Venice from the West Corporation Limit to Fremont, Hancock and Milan from Water to Huron on Hancock and Milan or Baltimore to Bolt on Milan. Also in February, staff applied to the local MPO or Metropolitan Planning Organization for 3 projects with Commission's approval. The first would be resurfacing of East Perkins Avenue from 250 to the east corporate limit, including sidewalks on the north side of the road between Remington and Milan, which would be replacing a sidewalk gap that exists currently within the city. The second would be reconstruction of East Water Street from Franklin to Meigs, including continuation of the off-road portion of the Sandusky Bay Pathway, as well as streetscaping. The third project would be to resurface West Monroe between Broadway and Camp, including the first phase of new separated storm sewers between Broadway and Decatur. Staff received confirmation from the MPO that all three were the highest scored projects within the region and are to be awarded for construction between 2023 and 2025. The total grants awarded for these three projects from the FHA will be around $1.25 million. ODOT has recognized some design errors on the State Route 6 project, so final numbers remain unknown, but will be brought to the City Commission for approval as they will add due to the matching funds that are required from the city to our portion of those projects. Also, since the beginning of 2020, somewhere between 78 and 88 segments of road will be resurfaced or reconstructed this year. Ongoing design and construction in 2020 will also include Hayes Avenue Safety, Warren Street, Meg Street, and Camp Street, which will be reconstructed next year, and the West Side Utility and Connectivity Project taking place on Venice. We do not intend to do any additional resurfacing projects this year. Myself, Director Reeder, and Director Klein have met pretty closely to see if we could get comfortable with the larger resurfacing projects to come on top of that. The thought is to wait and see how the budget comes in the rest of this year and to hopefully do something large early next year that would be combined with whatever next year's resurfacing budget. That would be a little more financially responsible than doing it now before we really know how this year will end. Happy to answer any questions on that. And then finally, for Public Works, the contractor for several projects, including safe routes to schools, Pierce Street, Buchanan, Jackson Street, Pier, and Shoreline Drive, continue to correct or repair items on their lists. Moving on to community development, we have some good news. The Johnson House, the Old House Guild of Sandusky, has announced the completion of their work to secure and weatherproof the Leonard Johnson House at 417 Columbus, which was built in 1854. The property was purchased last year from the Sandusky Library Foundation. The city awarded a $10,000 grant to support improvements to the property. Improvements included a new roof with repairs to fascia, soffits, and corbels, a new 200-amp electrical service with meter and breaker panel, a new basement sump pump, and the deconstruction of kitchenettes and bathrooms from 6 apartment units. The interior of the building has been cleaned, and a historical plaque has been mounted by the front door, noting the designation on the National Registry of Historic Homes. A dedicated parking space is deeded to the building directly behind the rear entrance gate, and the Old House Guild plans to sell the building for residential or general business. The Guild wants to thank the Sandusky City Commission as well as staff for supporting this important endeavor and hopes to continue with future projects of this nature to preserve more historic Sandusky landmarks. In addition to that, the Columbus Avenue Revitalization Project, during a virtual ceremony held on July 10th, the Cleveland Restoration Society recognized our City Hall project and related apartments and retail as the 2020 Urban Impact Award winner. This award was given during the annual celebration of preservation. The award honors the projects in Northeast or North Central Ohio that best demonstrate the positive and catalytic impact historic preservation can have within an urban core. For this project to win this prestigious honor over the likes of much larger projects in larger cities is a testament to how impactful and meaningful this project is for Sandusky and the region as a whole. The city wishes to thank the Restoration Society for the award, and also Maroos Brothers Construction and the Sand City LLC for their commitment to the city and to historic preservation. So obviously it's been a great few weeks for preservation of landmarks in Sandusky. Finally, the building division is proposing to eliminate the registration of apprentice and journeyman electricians and plumbers beginning in calendar year 21. The registration program within the city was created prior to the establishment of the Ohio Construction Industry Licensing Board, which has full authority within the state to regulate and register electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and hydronics contractors. Based on this, our program is redundant and adds additional burden on already licensed, registered, and city-registered contractors working in the city. The OCILB licensed and city-registered contractors are ultimately responsible for the work they perform and those employed by them. The program was useful prior to the existence of the OCILB, but it is antiquated, and the city will be bringing legislation in the upcoming months to revise relevant sections of our codified ordinances to reflect this proposed change for consideration. And then for the planning department, finally, we launched an online survey to elicit feedback for the downtown Sandusky master plan on Friday the 17th. And as of today, we already have well over 600 responses. We want to make sure we hear from everyone. Please spend a few minutes filling out the survey and share it with your family and friends. The survey will be open until July 31st. The link can be found on the City of Sandusky's social media account or at the following address, https://bit.ly/39NKVV1. That concludes my remarks for this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, any questions for the city manager? Thank you, Mr. Wupser. Next item on our agenda are items of old business. Commissioner Waddington, I wonder if you'd give us just a brief update on your most recent city cleanup, which I think occurred last weekend.
What was it?
Your most recent city cleanup?
Oh, yeah. This past weekend, we've been meeting at one park, and we had 14 show up at Firewall Park. So from there, we went over and did cleanup at the urine park or the splash pad there. And that's when I got hold of the city manager that the splash pad wasn't working. And DJ Loomis come out and got it fixed. It was, I think, an electrical problem, and we got that up and running. So that was good. The other thing is we're going to be doing the Bayfront this Saturday, 9 o'clock. We're meeting at Shelby Street Boat Ramp. And it sounds like, for whatever reason, we're getting more and more volunteers. I know for a while it was kind of stagnant, 3 or 4, but now we've picked up some steam. I think, and maybe if I could go into this real quick, that's why I brought up at the last meeting, if there was some way we could figure out, and you had some good ideas too, but as far as the first two that for volunteers, for lifetime volunteering, I had mentioned Jim Corso and then Jackie Collins, his first two from the city of Sandusky. And then if we could maybe have a commissioner or two each year, like each July. We have a lot of people that put a ton of time. And I was telling Mrs. Corso's here in the audience tonight, I was telling her when I worked at Ontario, her husband was out back doing them planter boxes. And I'd look out, I went to lunch at 6 o'clock and I come back, it's almost dark. And he goes, well, I think I can get this one done. I'll come back tomorrow. He just worked, and he got nothing out of that. And the same thing for Jackie Collins, all the hours feeding kids, taking care of kids, giving kids rides. I just think that each year it's time, well beyond the time that we start acknowledging them. We do stuff for homes in the city. You know, we give stuff out for that. And I just think that we could do better. And I would like at least the first year to have them two be the first two because they're long-time city volunteers, and then work on it, you know, next year, maybe get a group. I would love to sit on it. I'm going to be around for 3.5 years, so hopefully I am. And then get some residents involved, you know, maybe a couple commissioners and a couple residents involved, and pick them, you know. Just go by Washington Park every day. Bill Beal and his wife's down there every day, you know, and I think they need to be recognized.
I agree. It's an excellent idea, and we've asked our new commission clerk, Ms. Spriggs, to kind of head this effort up. There are a couple of things to iron out. That is location for a permanent plaque, permanent recognition of these volunteers, and perhaps some method, some type of selection committee to choose these worthy people. You're absolutely right, Mr. Waddington. This city runs on the backs of so many volunteers that go unnoticed and unheralded until we lose them or until they go away. It's time, it's way past time probably to begin to recognize them, and I'm hopeful that we can put together something that makes good sense and make it a yearly ritual in this community.
And then if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to have the two that I mentioned, Mr. Corso and then Mrs. Collins as the first two, and then we can work out all the details. But I think I would like to ask the commission or make that in a motion form to have the first two, you know, since they're both passed away now. I think they have to acknowledge them and then work on next year's, you know, going forward.
Can I have a second to that motion? Motion and a second discussion. We'll allow the details to be worked out by Ms. Spriggs and bring back to us perhaps at our next meeting for more specific details on location, committee selection, things like that. But I would ask for Ms. Spriggs to poll the commission on the motion, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed. Thank you, Commissioner Waddington.
Thank you.
Any additional items of old business? Items of new business. I will lead off with need to set a public hearing for a planned unit development at 1643 First Street for September 14th. I would ask for a motion to set that public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Briggs, will you poll the commission on that motion, please?
Yes. President Brady? Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed and that public hearing is set for September 14th. Search for a new law director belongs under new business also. That is Mr. Haberger is going to be leaving the city's employ in the next week, and we need to establish a method for interviewing and hiring a new law director, and we're going to do that through the city manager's office with the assistance of the HR department. That recommendation needs to come back to this commission for their consent, and I have asked Mr. Murray to serve as our conduit to that selection process and advise us of the direction that they're going when they get to a final recommendation. Mr. Murray has graciously agreed to perform that service at no additional cost, I might add.
Thank you.
Under new business, I'd like to share with you the opportunity that I've been given this past week on the political scene. Through the Great Lakes and St. Louis initiatives, I've had the opportunity to have a one-on-one virtual call with three very significant legislators who have done great things for the state of Ohio. Marcy Kaptur, I'm sure you're all familiar with our Congresswoman, and also Rob Portman's office legislative assistant. And today I was fortunate enough to speak with Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio. The purpose of that call was to lobby them on behalf of Sandusky. And the case that I attempted to make with each of them, and I believe they heard my voice, was that our city has been disproportionately affected by this virus. From the standpoint that I don't think you can find another small city in the state of Ohio that stands to lose as much as 25% of their revenue through the loss of one corporate citizen, or loss of revenue from one corporate citizen. That's Cedar Fair. That did not fall on deaf ears. Each of those legislators seem receptive to hearing that. What comes out of it, we don't know, or we won't know for a little while yet, but I continue to be optimistic that perhaps there will be some legislation that will eventually trickle down to small cities and small communities. But as my mom used to say, the proof is in the pudding. So we'll see that when the pudding gets there, I guess. Commissioner, do you have any other items of new business? Let's get to the main event tonight.
Commissioner President, if I could just, Trevor, I think we wanted to take care of the business of the acting law director position as well tonight. Trevor, I don't know if you want to speak to that. I know you've been working on that solution.
That's correct.
Yes, through you, Commission President, to the commissioners, we've been able to, just as of probably about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock this morning, get Justin Harris to give us a scope of services and agreement to come back in the interim until we select a full official law director. His scope of services will probably bring on the August 10th contract, but I think it would be good to at least have on record that the commission votes to approve him as the interim law director. This is a little different than maybe when the finance director left, because the finance director was replaced in-house. Since it's just me, there's no one in-house to, Lynn was not interested. She likes her criminal docket. So it was important that we go out-house and select someone, and Justin can hit the ground running, knows our procedures, knows our charter. I think he would be a good fit. And I would just ask that, I guess, I don't know if, Eric, if you want to ask the commission to approve him as the interim.
Through the commission president to the commission, I think if we need something, Trevor, to have him come on board between now and when we would bring the legislation at the next meeting. I know we sent the details to Dick and Dennis as soon as we had them today. It would be on a retainer basis of $6,500 a month for that period. And again, we do intend to conduct a full search for the law director position and to fill that position with a full-time city employee as soon as possible. But having someone with Justin's knowledge, not only of municipal law, but particularly of the individuals involved in the city based on his time here, we thought would make him a good fit. And so if you potentially consider a motion to approve that with us bringing back formally that agreement at the next meeting, that would be great.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Commissioner Murray.
Before Trevor departs, I just wanted to express my sincere thanks for his work for the last number of years as an assistant law director and more recently as our law director. I've watched him grow incredibly in that role. The courts will be very lucky to have him as a magistrate judge. I'm sure he'll do an excellent job. We miss him. He's been a great counselor for us, even-handed counselor, and he's just done a tremendous job, and I want to wish him luck and again express my thanks.
Here, here.
Thank you, sir.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Trevor, for the years of service you spent here, and good luck to you in your future endeavor. I know you're excited about it, and honestly, we're excited for you also.
Thank you.
Next time you see me, call him Judge.
I believe we've had a motion and a second. Do we need to take the roll on that? Ms. Spriggs, will you call the roll on that motion?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
And Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed. Mr. Harris joins us once again. Now to the main event. Commissioners, we have before you the charter review recommendations. I'd like to acknowledge that Mrs. Corso is in the room as a member of our volunteer charter review committee. Appreciate your effort in serving on that committee, Mrs. Corso, and we look forward to taking each of these up one at a time, which we're going to do post haste. I also have, we're also fortunate to have the chairman of the Charter Review Committee is, I believe, is with us virtually, Mr. Duff Milkey, who chaired that committee very successfully. Are you out there somewhere, Duff?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Excellent. My intention is to go through these recommendations one at a time, discuss them, and let's see where they take us. And I'm counting on you to provide us with some context. If that is required, we'll certainly hopefully ask the appropriate questions. Commissioners, do you have before you the charter recommendations?
Yes, I have them.
Excellent. Item number 1, Section 4, qualifications. Consider changing the required minimum residency for city commission candidates from 3 years to 18 months. Commissioners, discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I agree. I believe that as a former charter review member, as well as a current serving city commissioner, of course, I am a lifelong resident of the city of Sandusky. But I do believe that anyone coming into the community, 18 months would be a sufficient amount of time for them to get grounded and acclimated, and as well as possibly excited about serving in some type of elected official status. So I think this is a good change, and I would support this.
Additional questions or comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I would note that neither the federal nor state governments have an advanced residency requirement, and 3 years is quite significant. And I view the first two issues that have been recommended by the Charter Review Committee to be sort of expanders of the franchise, if you will, allows additional people to run. And I think that's very, very important. So I support this initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Additional questions or comments, Commissioners? I think I agree with Mr. Murray's analysis. Any time that you can provide an expansion of our charter that encourages more candidates to run, I think you're going to get better candidates. And to that end, I certainly support this also.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I don't really have a problem with reducing this to 18 months because 3 years was an arbitrary number to begin with. I would suggest that we haven't come up with a reason other than how we feel about it to change it. I'm troubled because I understand that there are people on the committee that wanted this changed because they haven't lived here for 3 years. Now, the 18-month time frame, I suppose, is acceptable, but the process leading up to this is troubling, and I think process matters in a democracy. Individuals who are going to benefit from a change should not be on the committee that makes a recommendation to do this. I'm going to accept I'm going to vote yes to do it because I don't care if it's 18 months, 3 years, or 6 months. But I am lodging that I find that unacceptable. Folks that are going to be benefiting from it would present this to us. Additionally, the concept, we had 8 people running in the last election. So the suggestion that we need more people running, that's not really a need that exists. It's okay if more people run, and reducing this opens it up for at least a couple people on this committee that decided they wanted to run. So I'm not sure if I just want to put that out there for the citizens that are making the vote. There should be full disclosure of what's going on, and the citizens will decide what to do.
Additional comments or questions on Section 4 qualifications? If not, may I have a motion?
Commission President, maybe it might help if I explain what we're looking for as a motion. I think if someone would make a motion to direct the law director to bring back language to the effect of what the charter review has recommended for the next meeting, special meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we got to clear that up, that what we're doing tonight will just be recommendations for for Trevor, and that comes back for the special meeting because the date was offset. The elections are always the second Tuesday after the first Monday. It's been like that for 100 years. And somehow we got that off script. So I don't think we can even, other than make a recommendation, I don't think we can even vote on outside of this for tonight, just to bring it back like next Monday, I guess is what he wanted to do. I'm not sure if everybody's clear on that, if they didn't get to read their emails today.
Commissioner Weigand, I believe that what Trevor is indicating is that it's our obligation to review each of these recommendations and make a decision to either allow them to be placed on the ballot for a decision by the elected or to reject them. I've been advised the commission can amend these recommendations by adding or subtracting to them. Additionally, commission has the authority to recommend any charter amendment in any addition to those submitted by our charter review. What we're doing tonight is recommending that legislation be brought back to this commission to be voted on.
I understand.
And that has to be done before a certain date. And to accomplish that, we will need to hold a special meeting to accomplish that vote.
Right.
But what we're doing here tonight is simply going through each of these recommendations and any recommendation that any commissioner chooses to make, and then acting on those. And by acting on that, I mean we're asking the law director to forward that recommendation to our legal person at that point in time and bring back legislation that will have to be voted on here.
Okay, so if it's next Monday night, does anybody know the time or?
I don't believe that's been set. I don't believe we've set a time for a special meeting, no.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
all of what you said is accurate. It's not precise. There's no requirement that we do anything with this
That's correct.
anytime soon. Suddenly you've added an extra meeting. Where's that coming from?
I have not acted.
Well, you said this has to be done, and that's, what is that about?
If it is our intention to have these, any of these put on the ballot in November, we'll be required to pass legislation prior to a certain date, a 90-day period before the election.
We don't have to put it on the ballot in November, though, correct? We do not have to do that. We can put it on the ballot anytime we choose.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Haber, are we clear on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I believe we have a motion. We have a motion before us that. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Section 4, changing qualifications from 3 years to 18 months. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, my motion was, I thought, consistent with Mr. Haberger's advice that it was a motion to ask him to prepare legislation. Right.
That is how I understand it also. I believe everyone understands that motion.
Thank you.
Ms. Briggs, will you poll the commission on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meiser?
Yes.
That motion is approved. Section 6, salary and bonds. Consider increasing the salary for a city commissioner to be commensurate with the State of Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, PERS, minimum for eligibility into PERS. Here's where I would like to reach out to Mr. Milky if he can give us his analysis of that recommendation.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. With the Charter Review Committee, we looked at a number of other cities and around the area and around the state to kind of look at where the salaries were falling for the services of commissioners and council folks throughout the state. And we also looked at, as Mr. Murray mentioned, the impact of that compensation related to broadening a pool of candidates. And the discussion was they didn't want the compensation to be the driver of that in one sense, but in the other sense, we wanted to make sure that it adequately compensated people for the tremendous amount of time the commissioners have to spend, not just at the meetings, but also as the meetings, after the meetings, and the other committees and so forth that they serve on. And then, I think one of the primary drivers of that was with the eligibility for the PERS system. And so there's an increase in the salary that would put everyone, or the commissioners, on par to be able to participate in that system. And then the idea was to index that so that would be one of the bundle, that would be part of the bundle of compensation that a commissioner could expect for the tremendous amount of time and service that they present to the city. And so the committee as a whole, after a number of discussions, you came to the recommendation that you have before you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Milky. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Murray.
Mr. Chairman, there is a prohibition against voting against a salary increase for your time in office. This obviously is not something we're doing. If it is an increase, it would be approved by the voters, ultimately not by this commission. I do want to thank the Charter Review Committee for their work in this regard. This is probably the most controversial, or it might be the most controversial of the recommendations, but I think it's critical. I think all of us are aware that the last round, a candidate was gathering petitions, found out what the salary was going to be, and said, well, I'm not going to file my petitions. And I think this has happened before. And so I think we want to encourage additional people to run. Mr. Pohl is right. We had 8 run. We want 8. We want 12. We want 15. We want highly qualified people to run. And we don't want to see people discouraged because of the compensation. So I will support this.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Additional questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, if the citizens want to pay me more money, I'll be happy to take it. I think the charter exists so that we protect the citizens and give us control of what's going on in our city. Indexing this and connecting it to the state pension fund ad infinitum, the taxpayers should think very carefully about whether or not they want to lose control of what the salary is. I find, this was an interesting way to present this, a simple, straightforward raise in pay that citizens could identify, say, yes, this is acceptable or not, would have been neat. But when you've added this in that says it's tied to something that's done with PERS, that just means that suddenly after they vote this in this time, and I think you can probably convince the public that we do enough work that we should be paid more, but they lose control after that, because every time PERS changes theirs, the salaries change. And I think that citizens should maintain control of what they pay the city commission, just as we maintain control of what we pay the people that are that work for the city. So I think I'm going to vote no for this, although I'd love to have a raise. But I think that this is a backdoor, this is a trick that citizens lose control of the salary that gives you an automatic raise whenever PERS changes something. So for that reason, I'm just going to say no, it shouldn't go to the people as is.
Additional comments, Commissioners? I'll entertain a motion, if there is one.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meiser.
I'd make a motion that Mr. Haberger creates legislation to adopt this and present it back to the commission for approval. So I don't know if I'm getting.
Is there a second?
Second. I'll second.
There's a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Briggs, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Mr. Chairman.
That'd be
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Twine.
This is always a challenging part of being an elected official. It is good that this has gone through the Charter Review Committee, and I think this probably always comes up, at least since I've served on the Charter Review Committee. And it is difficult to make those types of decisions. I do believe that there is room for some type of increase, and quite frankly, I think tying it into PERS is a good way to do that. Again, it's kind of difficult for me. I don't know how the other commissioners feel voting to support this, but ultimately it will go to the citizens to make the final decisions if it survives this legislative process. So I will support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Twine. Additional comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meiser.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I mean, Mr. Poole mentioned in the first one, he said that people that served on the Charter Review Committee were poised to benefit to be a city commissioner. I don't see a lot of benefits to serving our community except for our desire to do so. So if we can get young people that are here 18 months, 1 year, if we kind of like for leaders to step forward and run and get elected, they have to get elected, don't forget. And I don't think $8,000, I don't know the exact figure, is that out of line for somebody to work every year for 4 years, to donate dedicate their time to do that. So I'm going to support it as well.
Additional comments, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddington.
When I was getting signatures, this set an alarm off my head, and I know I've talked about it in the past with former commissioners. One of the candidates, I was on Columbus Ave, we were talking, I said, yeah, I'm on my third page, and he, I think at that time, had more signatures than me, and he goes, well, what do you guys make? And I said, $100 a week. He goes, what? And he goes, no way. I said, it's $100 a week, check it out. And that candidate did not file. I run into him once in a while, and he just kind of laughs about it. But if you're doing it for the money, and this increase is not that significant, I know we all spend our time, phones, gas, different events. We all get hit up for donations all the time. Almost weekly, I get hit up for to donate whatever. There's always something. And I think you got to, number one, if you're going to run, love the community and then get out and get engaged in it. Just don't show up. And I had mentioned this years ago. A lot of folks run and get on, and you got to read your packet and do your work, do your homework, and just not show up on Monday and vote. There's a lot more to it to be engaged out in the community. So that's how I look at it. I have no problem with this increase. If the residents pass it, fine. If not, I don't see anybody stepping down. But I think this would encourage some folks with the retirement to possibly run in the future. So that way I'll support it.
Additional questions or comments, Commissioner? Ms. Briggs, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Yes. Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed, and that legislation will be ordered in. Section 16, price and mode of publication. Mr. Milky, can you share with us what we're doing here?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. The discussion around this is kind of set forth in our letter there was more about, or was centered around the advantages of modern technology and the ability to disseminate information much more readily than would have been available in the past at the time that the charter was written and had been administered. And so what this suggests is that maybe there's a better way to get this information out, utilize the city's website, which is now regular order in today's world. People know where to go to get that information, and then also to provide access to that at physical sites as designated by the city commission, where people who didn't have access to the internet could go and actually physically pick up the legislation and read it. And then that would be coupled with a more trimmed down advertisement in the newspaper that would use the title and a descriptor to notify the public of the activities of the city. And that was intended to marry modern technology with the current practices to allow a bridge to better disseminate that information.
Thank you, Mr. Milky. Commissioners, questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddington.
Just recently, I know within the last week, at the very bottom it said Mayor Richard Brady. If somebody read that, I hope they can give me a call and tell me if they read it and understood it. There was a full page that we took out in the register on the legals. I mean, so I don't know how many people even look at it. I do like this, if we do condense it down, I think that'd be smart, and then maybe to a couple columns. That's just my opinion.
Additional comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
what exactly words are going to be changed in 25? What portions of this are we talking about? There's 2 sections to this.
Mr. Milky, can you share with us exactly what sections would be streamlined or
Yeah,
changed?
it's I think, Mr. Poole, are you referring to section 15 and 16? Section 15, I believe it designates what needs to be published, and section 16 is how it's published. So this would only impact the methodology of distribution, not the content.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Additional questions? Commissioners, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I make a motion to, for Trevor to include section 16, price and mode of publication in legislation to bring before the next meeting.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I don't have a problem putting this on the, putting it up for a vote, but we did this before, and it was soundly defeated, mostly because, I don't know why people voted it down last time exactly, since I didn't speak to them all. But I do recognize that probably about 40% of the folks in the community do not have access to internet. So putting this out there is fine. Expectations of how it turns out, we'll just have to see.
Additional questions? Ms. Briggs, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer.
Yes.
That motion carries, and that legislation will be brought in. Next charter item is section 25, expenditures. Mr. Milky, can you share with us the committee's thinking on raising that from $10,000 to $50,000?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. As we mentioned in our comments and accompanying the recommendation, this section 25 is last amended 20 years ago in the year 2000, and the cost of goods has obviously risen since that time. This was one of the sections where there was some suggestion and talk about indexing this to the state levels that they utilize for competitive bidding. And we also reviewed what other cities were doing and gathered information to kind of guide us as to what the appropriate level for this was. After the discussion, the committee decided that indexing this particular type of item was not in order, and that rather that we should recommend raising the amounts to be more reflective of the cost environment which the world now represents, both for competitive bidding and for the expenditure of legislation. Both were currently at $10,000, and the recommendations to take them to $50,000.
Thank you, Mr. Milky. Commissioners, questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddington.
I looked at this and I did watch the discussion on this. Just my opinion, instead of 50, I could be okay with going from 10 to 25, but 50 to me just seems, and Duff, was there any discussion like ballpark and anything in between or during with the board?
Yeah, there was some discussion. We discussed a number of different levels, and 50,000 represented a consensus of the group that then was voted on. But yes, there were other discussions about lower amounts.
Okay, thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Commission President, it's Trevor.
Yes.
I just want to clarify that there's actually and I'm sure you guys know, but there's actually two bidding thresholds, or two thresholds that we're talking about here. One is for the competitive bidding, and I think the Charter Review Committee was fully on board with that one being 50,000. I think the threshold for expenditures requiring legislation, I think that was the talk where lower number was batted around a little bit.
So this, to be clear, Mr. Haberger, this legislation would both impact competitive bidding and the ability to departments to spend this amount of money.
Correct, without coming back to commission, correct.
Thank you. Additional questions?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
on the competitive biddings portion of this, do we have any data information from staff about what kind of projects and how many, what it would impact? How many, what time, how often is this an issue? Say at $50,000?
I don't know who would be in a position to answer that. Mr. Klein, perhaps?
I would guess Aaron has the most experience of the directors.
Aaron, do you have, Mr. Klein, do you have some feedback on how often this impacts your department?
Through you, Mr. President, I don't have data handy, but what I can say is that it impacts it, I would say, several times a month. I mean, it would definitely be more than just a small occasion. And a lot of times it also happens when it's just a simple piece of equipment for a water or wastewater treatment plant that costs more than $10,000. It gets really difficult and it delays things. So it's not just projects that would be bid, but equipment purchases and other things like that.
And through the commission president, I know Troy Vaccaro, I met with the fleet division a few weeks ago, and he was aware that this was coming through, and he said that it often comes up with our ability to purchase vehicles quickly as well, which you tend to lose when they come up for a deal. It tends to move faster than we have the ability often to move, according to Troy.
I can tell you as a liaison to the engineering department that there are very few things in our engineering department that cost us less than $10,000. I know the impact of that department is probably more than any other department. Not necessarily on the competitive bidding, but on the purchase side of it. I think it's fair to point out on that same issue that this isn't just money grabbed out of thin air. It is money that is in a budget somewhere. It had to be in a budget at some point in time. It had to be before this body. We're not giving anyone a blank check to start writing out $50,000 checks or whatever amount we decide on here tonight if we decide on a different amount. It is money that is already accounted for at some point in time. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Twine.
Chairman? Nope.
I know these discussions and the feedback is based upon the 50,000. What kind of feedback can we get if we go lower to 25,000? What kind of obstacles would we run into if it were not 10 and not 50, but 25,000?
Comments to that question, Commissioners? That certainly is a compromise.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meisner.
Mr. Chair. Just to answer Naomi or give her some feedback, and also with you with engineering, I was involved in the 2000 charter review, and at that time we were requesting 20,000 at that time. It was defeated. However, in today's market, I think it's micromanaging for us to try to hold people to 10 or the department has a 10 or $20,000. There is a budgetary process where they have to present their budgets to us. We approve that. There's a financial committee that reviews. There's a state audit committee that reviews that. There is the Ohio Open Checkbook that any resident can go on and review what we spend the money on, or they spend the money on. I just think it is really micromanaging to try to limit people less than $50,000 a year. Ohio Revised Code allows 50,000 a year for a purpose, because that is a recognized standard that any progressive city is going to follow in this community, in their community. These men and women that are running these departments all know what they're doing, and there's checks and balances all over the place. We don't have to have this like every money. And to Mr. Klein's point, I don't know what aluminum amalgamate or methyl ether or whatever, when he presents a $50,000 chemical budget for that, what kind of researcher can I do? He says I need it, I got to vote for it, right? We need clean water. We need our sewer to be clean going out. EPA, in the previous legislation we passed, I saw that EPA mandated $83 million of water improvements, and they negotiated it down to 18 million for this year. Like that is mind-boggling, that kind of money. So these guys are working hard every day, and to limit them to $10,000 is kind of silly. So I'm going to vote for it, but I know it's for the citizens and the residents, but we're going to have to go out and sell them how much more efficient and how well we can do our jobs, or they can do their jobs. I keep thinking we, but they can do their jobs if we give them that latitude to do it.
Commission President, it's Trevor. I got something I'd like to add, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Trevor.
When I was talking with the Charter Review, I kind of did some research as to the bid thresholds for various things. So I just wanted to point out that the state, the county, we are a chartered municipality, but a statutory municipality, a village, a township, public libraries, and metro parks. Their bid thresholds are all at $50,000. Looked at a bunch of other cities. Many of those were at 50,000. Almost all of them were more than 10, of course. But I just wanted to point out that, states, counties, statutories, cities, villages, townships, public libraries, metro parks, those are all at 50,000. That was just what I found in my research.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
would you have someone just give us a discussion of the process that would take place if we changed it to 50,000 for something like buying cars? What's the process that happens instead of this formal bidding? How do we get a piece of equipment?
Mr. Klein, can you shed some light on exactly how that process works? I don't think it'd work any differently, but go ahead and shed some light on how it works now and how it would work then.
Yeah, certainly through you, Mr. President. Right now, anything that's over $10,000, we, depending on what it is, obviously, if it's on the state contract, that makes it very simple, but rarely do we find things on that state contract. If it's a project, we have to go through an entire design process, which if we have time in-house, that's helpful. And then we have to prepare bid documents so that somebody can bid on that project. We have lost several bidders when we would ask them for a cost to do the project, and they'll give us a price of maybe $12,000, $13,000, and we tell them we can't do that because it's over the 10. We'll have to go out and do a formal bid. And then they say, well, I don't want to bond it. I don't have the time to do the insurance, because then they have to have $1 million insurance and all these other things that add on to it. And they just decide that they don't want to do it because it's not worth it for $10,000. So it really makes it complicated, and it reduces our possibility on those lower budgeted projects like that to move forward. If we do get to the point where we're going out to a bid, we will prepare those bid documents, we will bid it, and then we will analyze all those bids, and then come to commission. First and foremost, we come to commission for approval to go out to bid. Once we get those bids, we analyze them and then make a recommendation to commission to award the contract. That would not change whether it's 10,000, 25,000, or 50,000. As far as purchasing a piece of equipment, that might be an RFP, that might be an RFQ. It would be more of a proposal process where we would go out for proposals, and if it comes to 50,000, if it exceeds 10,000, then we have to go through that same process of getting approval from commission to award the project. So anything under that number, under the 10,000 currently, we still go out and get the multiple quotes per the ordinance. I think it's anything over 1,000 and under 10,000, if I recall it correctly. We still get the multiple quotes. We contact people. Several things that it does when that number is raised, there's several things that expedite the projects when it does fall underneath that $10,000 or $25,000 or $50,000 threshold. It allows us to move more quickly. For one example for that is Lions Park shoreline stabilization. That project probably could have gotten done months and months earlier if we had the opportunity to not have to go through that bidding and design process. We had to go through a formal design, which we would still get design, we'd still do it the right way, but there's one thing in having to prepare biddable documents to constructible documents and making sure that it's a fair playing field. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, even when you're buying a vehicle. It's preparing those specs exactly what you want, analyzing the proposals as they come in line for line, and it's going through it. So none of those processes would change. It would just give us more flexibility, free up staff time, and it would give us the option to have more bidders and more people submitting on the projects because they wouldn't have to carry all those state bonds and insurances and requirements that come with having to enter into that contractual obligation.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddington.
If you want to do the 50, go ahead and go for it. But I'm trying to sell it. This is a tough economy right now, and from 10 to 50, I just think the ones that pay attention, that's going to be a little startling. I suggested 25. If you want to do 50, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be a tough sell. I'll support it tonight to put it on for next Monday, but that's a big jump, and I understand what Aaron's saying about the cost and bidding and all that. I get all that, but that's a big, big jump from 10. And I know it's been years ago. Also in 1998, the city commission pay was $5,000. So, but it's just a big jump. I just think it'll be tough to sell during the election, especially with this COVID and everything that's going on right now as far as jobs and stuff.
Mr. Chair.
A lot of people look at that. I could be wrong.
Commissioner Poole.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think that, I think that Mr. Waddington's probably right. And the problem is that you haven't provided anything that suggests that the threshold should be $50,000. We do projects every year, all the time, and the inability to give us any idea how often it would occur, what kinds of projects, how we would benefit from it. And asking the public to just vote on faith because this is the way it's done in Castalia is really not, it doesn't sound like we've done our research to do this and probably shouldn't support it. So I'd be happy to make I'll make a motion that we change this when anticipated an expenditure will exceed $25,000, formal competitive bidding shall be required.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I don't think we can change this, can we, as far as the 50,000?
Yeah,
No, we can change it.
You can change any part of it.
You should, yeah.
Yes. Mr. Haberger, that's correct, is it not? We can amend and change any of these numbers?
Through you, Commissioner President, that's correct. I just had a question for Commissioner Poole.
Sure.
Would you be changing the threshold for expended come back to legislation at 25 as well? Both numbers or just a competitive bid?
For me, it's just a competitive bid. There's no, these numbers are put here so that we have some idea or control over what our money is being spent on. And the number, and this isn't just about cars. Anything under $25,000 being spent without telling commission or without commission or the taxpayers knowing about it is just too much. The bidding process, I understand. I could have lived with 50 if you had just given some idea that you put some thought into it, and that it actually, that there was some benefit from it other than just, well, we saw they're doing it, so maybe we want that much because it makes it easier. But in terms of getting up every day and spending $50,000 and the public doesn't know about it, I would hope the public would say absolutely not. So no, I'm only addressing the bidding process because I see that we can benefit from that.
So Commissioner Poole, if I understand your motion, it's to amend the dollar amount specifically for the competitive bidding, to lower that from, or to raise that from $10,000 to $25,000, but leaving the expenditure requirement recommendation at $50,000. Is that correct?
No, at $10,000 down at the bottom. It stays at it needs to stay at $10,000. Folks being able to give this is that section, the last section, other than that $10,000 is giving your kid a blank credit card that he can spend $50,000 and not tell you about it until you get the bill. That's not good governing from my perspective.
So your motion is to not change the expenditure requirement at all, to leave that at $10,000 and to reduce their recommendation from $50,000 to $25,000 on the competitive bidding.
Yes, and I'm doing that only because there's just nothing on the table other than that tells us what we benefit from it. Running it up to $50,000, how many projects does that involve? What kinds of projects are we talking about? We don't know, is it something that we actually want to have competitively bid?
I just wanted to clarify the motion. I think we have a motion.
But that's what I'm looking for.
I think we understand Commissioner Poole's motion. Is there a second to that motion to leave the $10,000 expenditure at $10,000 and to raise the $10,000 expenditure on competitive bidding to $25,000? Is there a second to that motion?
Thank you.
That came from where?
I think that was a sneeze.
Somebody sneezed.
Was there a second to that motion?
I don't think anybody seconded.
I don't believe we have had a second, have we? That motion fails for lack of a second. Additional discussion on the on section 25, Commissioner. Commissioner Meiser.
To answer Mr. Waddington's question or concerns, I think that selling it, yes, would be difficult. However, he'd probably be the best one to go out and sell it. But I just want to remind everyone that we vote on the budget at the beginning of the year. What is allocated, where it's allocated, and every department head should have a line item budget that we could review. Every line item, how it goes down. They should not have a $50,000 chunk in their budget that has nothing appropriated to that. You have to have it. What are you spending this on at that point? If you want to dig into it, that's where to do it. And if the residents want to dig into it, they need to go to Ohio Open Checks and checkbooks and look at it. You can see every dollar that the city of Sandusky spends. So I think it just slows everything down. It's a recognized. We always compare ourselves to Perkins. I mean, we'd like to, our local government. What does anybody know what Perkins threshold is?
It is $50,000.
Mr. Chairman, through you to any department head or Mr. Whoopser?
No.
Through you, Commission President, it's a township, so it would be 50,000.
There you go. We like to compare ourselves with our local government. Perkins Township to the south of us is 50,000.
Additional discussion, Commissioners? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meiser.
I'd like to make a motion that we prepare legislation to present this to the residents for voting on. I don't know the language. I'm sorry, Trevor, but
I think we get your gist. Is there a second to Mr. Meiser's motion?
chickens.
I'm going to second that motion. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear from
Mr. Waddington.
I'd like to hear from the other commissioners what their thoughts are.
I'm asking for discussion.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I'll
Poole.
speak. I would suggest that Mr. Meinzer what he's indicated about the budget. Those line items in the budget are general, broad categories that have thousands of dollars in them. It does not identify what a $49,000 purchase would actually be without the commission having any idea. It's nice, you're absolutely right. We can, after the money's been spent, we can go look and see what the money was spent on. But this is a blank check that says you can buy what you want up to $50,000, and the city of Sandusky will stand behind it. So the concept about what's in the budget has little to do with what money gets spent on day to day, because the categories are so broad and general. I think this is just a tad bit reckless for me.
Additional discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
So I hesitated to second Mr. Meinzer's motion because the $50,000 amount seems unachievable politically. I think it's probably the right policy, but I think this is an instance where the perfect can get in the way of the good. And so I would move to modify both numbers to 25,000.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Harris.
Mr. Murray there, he beat me to the punch. I think, in regards to this, I know from my personal experience of touring the facilities just some months ago and speaking to some of the heads there, you might be surprised at what pieces of equipment actually cost. I know, I can't remember, I guess the correct term for this piece of equipment, but just to put things into perspective, there was a piece of equipment that I could hold in just two hands that cost better than 10 grand. So in saying that, I think to, quickly take care of things and get things fixed as those issues arise is certainly of importance. So I think, kind of just meeting everybody, and finding a happy medium. I think that, the $25,000 for each does just that. So I would be willing to go forward with that.
Commissioner Meiser, are you willing to amend your motion from $50,000 to $25,000?
Well, absolutely, but I have to give credit to Mrs. Twine, though, because she's the first one to mention 25,000. So
I did.
Excellent.
Yeah, I will amend it to 25 because I can see that's the happy medium. So it might be more sellable to the public. So yes, I'd like to amend that.
And I will second my second to that motion, to the amended motion of $25,000. And we're clear, it's raising the spending limit to $25,000, and it's raising the competitive bidding limit to $25,000.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Poole.
My only sticking point is dealing with the spending limit. There's just too many things that can be purchased between $10,000 and $25,000 that I think the commission's role is that we should know about it. It's the competitive bidding. He's explained why it will be of value. The arbitrary spending money on whatever you choose is not a good thing, because people, we do not have line items in the budget for what people spend it on. So I've said it several times. The public can make the decision, but I think I'm going to I'm not sure I'm going to say yes. Well, I'm going to say no, because I should go on the record that I don't think it's a good idea that we should allow people to spend money without our knowledge that much. And I point out that I don't think we have been slowed down from buying any equipment. We have not had any adverse reaction, adverse problems with a $10,000 spending limit. If you're ordering a car, a piece of equipment, it's not like running down to the corner store that you pick it up. There's a time frame involved, and waiting a week to present it to the city commission is not going to slow down buying a $40,000 or $30,000 piece of equipment. That's just not true. That they have to be able to call up and say deliver it this week. So thank you.
Mr. Briggs, we poll the commission on the motion.
Commission President, I just wanted to clarify that first we'll do 2 rounds of votes. One will be on the amendment to the 25,000, since we did have a first and second on the original motion. So first round will be on Mr. Miser's amendment, and then the second round will be to order the legislation in.
Excellent.
Okay. Mr. Waddington?
For clarification, this is when Mr. Miser changed to 25,000, correct?
That's
Yes, yes, I'll be yes, and thank you.
Okay. So Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No, I don't know.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the legislation being ordered in.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That legislation is ordered in. Section 27, Civil Service. Mr. Milky, if you're still with us and haven't retired for the evening, would you consider explaining the Civil Service section to us?
Yes, sure. I'm still here, Mr. President. Yeah, I mean, the broad spectrum of this Section 27 Civil Service was to broaden the applicant pool and also to look at the years of active service and express it as 10 out of 12 years, so that someone who had 10 years of prior experience within the last 12 would maintain eligibility, because sometimes people transition in between jobs, and the way it's currently written, that would disqualify them. And so that was intended to just kind of give a little more flexibility to that, while at the same time try to keep intact the 10 years of service. So they would have to be active in 10 out of the prior 12 years. And then also to the other recognition was the position, the titles that would be eligible to run and to apply, and to add equivalent ranks given the different titles that other departments use. That was meant to kind of broaden, as I said, broaden the applicant pool. And again, this is the way we looked at it and discussed it was, this is about the applicant pool. It doesn't mean they would get the job, but it means that more people could become involved in the process. And so there would be a broader spectrum of choices. I do want to add to this that we had input from both the fire chief and the police chief in terms of the ranks. And we had a good discussion with the fire chief on a couple of different occasions. Initially, we talked about lieutenant, captain, and fire marshal, or their equivalent being considered for fire chief. But I did want to note that when we brought this to vote, the fire chief did come back to the committee and ask that we keep that at just, I believe it was captain. And the charter committee heard that recommendation, but decided to maintain the original position of broadening it to include lieutenant, captain, and fire marshal. But in fairness to the fire chief, I wanted to make sure that I had said at the time that we would bring that forward, make sure the commission was aware of that, so I'm doing that now. And then on the police chief, it was the title of sergeant or its equivalent, which Chief Warzak supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milliken. It's my understanding that Chief Wilcox is with us also, and he would like to address the commission regarding the fire chief portion of this civil service section. Chief, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I am. And through you, Mr. President, just to kind of elaborate on what was said, we sat and talked with leadership once this was initially initiated. The intent initially was to broaden the pool. Last time the test was given or the position was open, we had one candidate from the city of Sandusky that was that applied for the position. And in a lot of cases, when you're trying to develop an officer corps, give them exposure to these type of jobs. So at the very least, when they are ready for the position, they know what the process looks like and everything. Having talked with leadership after this was initially presented, it was overwhelmingly decided and expressed that they would prefer they would be led by someone from the rank of captain or higher. And after listening to the passionate debate, I concurred. And from that point on, I went to the Charter Review Committee to make my recommendation for withdrawal from the initial recommendation. So that's where that all initiated from.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief Wilcox. Discussion, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Deputy Commissioner Twine.
Yes, I am very supportive of requesting Trevor to prepare legislation for this change. Having heard Chief Wilcox and of course being liaison to the police department with Chief Warzak, and having served on previous fire chief search committees and police chief search committee, I think this does open up opportunities for more to possibly apply for those positions. I appreciate the Charter Committee searching this and getting as much background information as possible to bring this forward. So I do support this.
Additional discussion, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meiser.
I like the fact that Chief Wilcox brought up captains and above, and just because time and experience counts for a lot. I like civil service, competitive exams, anonymity for testing. It knocks out cronyism, nepotism, all that kind of stuff. With that said, is like Sandusky succession planning in the past was lieutenant, battalion chief, assistant chief, chief. So now they're down to lieutenant, captain. They've eliminated 3 battalion chiefs and an assistant chief through past budget cuts. So now we're trying to figure out how to do succession planning, and we're reaching down to like people that have 10 years experience and only one competitive exam, or in the case of fire marshal, is an appointed position. So we don't want that. I think that if you want, if we get back, Chief Wilcox should have an assistant chief that we can train, or he could train to be ready to step in and fill his role, or at least be competitive to fill that role, like not reaching down in the lower ranks for that position. So I appreciate that he came around, and I agree with him 100%. And there's a lot of and other progressive departments have deputy chiefs, battalion chiefs, assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs. There's a lot of people out, even in Ohio, that we can pull ever if Chief Wilcox decides to retire.
Mr. Chairman.
Additional comments, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole.
Chief Wilcox, would you expand on the conversation you had with your staff that led to the conclusion that we should leave this alone? What exactly was their reasoning? What was their thought process behind that?
It's quite, to you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole. It's really quite simple. The leadership and the department had expressed that they would prefer to have leadership come from a rank that has been in a position of command level. Command level being important to the department, and like I said, for that reason alone, that was enough for me to reconsider.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I have a question. Is the police chief on? Is police chief on?
Chief Orzak, are you with us?
Chief, what is the minimum requirement for taking a sergeant's exam?
Right now, they have to have 2 years' experience as a patrolman, and then they can take the sergeant's exam.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that widening the pool to someone with 2 years' experience as a patrol to apply for police chief is simply it's an unnecessary exercise. The fire department, Chief Wilcox, firemen are pretty smart. The concept of the chief of police coming from someone that has got 2 years or 3 or 4 years experience in the police department, period, the fact that we as a community would even consider that, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense. The progression up the ranks, usually you'd like to think that you're getting someone who has had broad experience in various aspects of running the department, police department, hopefully have been in several different divisions perhaps, and has got some semblance of wisdom. And I would suggest that 2 years as a patrol person is hardly where we want to take this department by law. So, thank you.
Additional discussion, Commissioners?
Commission President, it's Trevor. I got
Yes, Trevor.
something I wanted. The thought of the sergeant wasn't so much for our force. I mean, it is, but the harder part is with all these cuts that Mike Miser has talked about, you'll find that a lot of sheriff's departments no longer have lieutenants. So you could have someone that's been a sergeant for 20-some years at a sheriff's department that would make a really good candidate for police chief, but he wouldn't be qualified. He or she wouldn't be qualified. They don't have very few captains. So that was a thought process there, is that when we're looking for people from outside of just our department, what their terms, what they call a lieutenant, what they call a sergeant, what that person is may look completely different than what you're thinking of.
Thank you, Mr. Haber. Additional discussion, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole?
I appreciate Mr. Haber's thinking, I guess, but I would suggest that the across the board, well, I guess you can't say across the board totally. The idea of having rank is tied to responsibility, and police department is a quasi-military setup. I would suggest that sergeants, the job that they do and what they're responsible for has little to do with running a department, which is why you have the delineation, the way it's set up. And the idea of a sergeant next week is going to be considered a captain or take on captain responsibilities in a company in a military command does not happen. It doesn't make any sense. You can't be a lieutenant this week and then expect reasonably to be a general. Take the exam to be the general. This does not make any sense whatsoever, and we have to live with what we write as a law. All the intentions of what Trevor said has little to do with the fact that if you got 2 years experience and you've been a sergeant and you took the sergeant's exam, you are now eligible to take up our time and try and be the chief. Now, you can say, oh, he might not be hired. Might be, though. Depends on who your friends are. We don't have any control, really tight controls over who gets hired based on anything. I just don't have a problem. I think this is a bad idea.
Additional comments, commissioners? I'll entertain a motion on this, on section 27, civil service.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I make a motion to request Trevor to prepare legislation for the changes in section 27 civil service as defined by the Charter Review Committee.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion.
Commission President Trevor.
Commissioner, go ahead, Trevor.
Commissioner Twine, did that include leaving out what Chief Wilcox wanted left out? I assume that, or did you want that left in?
I believe that I didn't understand that Chief Wilcox wanted that to be changed. Maybe I misunderstood what he said.
Okay, to you, Mr. President. So initially we had recommended the position of fire marshal and lieutenant to be added to consideration for applicant of chief or the position of chief. After talking with leadership, however, it was overwhelmingly expressed that they would prefer to have or be led by someone that had command level experience from the captain position or above. The examples that they gave was the actual process that yielded me in the position of fire chief, and that the candidates that applied for the position wasn't that shortage. My concern was more or less when we initiated this process was to give other officers, development in terms of testing for these type of assessments and everything else. However, after listening to the leadership and the membership, I've since retracted that and wanted to have a withdrawal of that initial recommendation.
Commissioner Twine, do you understand Chief Wilcox was
Yeah, I have a further question on that. Just as the question came forth, or not the question, but the comment came forth that maybe there's a sheriff's deputy or whatever that is classified in a position that would, with this legislation, would qualify that person to apply. I'm going to ask the same of the fire chief's position, with, especially with Chief Wilcox experience with East Cleveland and coming from outside of Sandusky. You mentioned that you did talk, of course, with our fire personnel. So how would there be any difference from someone coming from a different community or city fire department?
Through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Twine, it possibly can be because there are other departments and fire departments that eliminated the position of captain. So as we spoke of East Cleveland, they go from deputy chief down to lieutenant. There's not a captain rank to be considered. So currently the person that succeeded me in the city of East Cleveland was in the position of lieutenant. So those are possibilities. I've also heard possibilities as well that the position of battalion chief or captains has been eliminated, and some departments are led by just their lieutenants. So to be transparent and to be truthful, yes, that can also be possibilities and limitations for someone to be considered for the position in the future if that wish was to apply for our city.
Okay, I support my recommendation as submitted and as submitted through through the Charter Review Committee, because what I'm looking at is of course opening up the ability for people to apply. And yes, we always want to consider our people within the city, but also we want to be able to allow others from other communities to also apply, sir. So yes, my request my request stands as submitted.
So if I understand correctly, Commissioner Twine, your motion is to ask for legislation as the Charter Review has recommended in this document.
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a second to that motion?
I already did.
We have a motion and I lost track in the long discussion, Mr. Murray. I apologize.
Okay, that's okay.
We have a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Briggs, will you poll the commission on this motion?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
No.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer.
No.
That motion is approved. Commissioners, are there any charter amendments that you wish to take upon and amend yourselves, other than those recommendations by the Charter Review Committee? Long silence. There are none, apparently. Now the decision needs to be made. This legislation is being ordered in. Now the decision needs to be made by this commission. Trevor, is it correct that a decision needs to be made by this commission? You're going to bring legislation going to be brought before us in an effort to, this commission needs to make a decision when these should be put on a ballot.
Correct. Whatever we want to vote in for the election has to be certified to the Board of Elections by 4 p.m. on August 5th. That's next Wednesday. That's why I had suggested maybe August 3rd would be the best day. One, because it'll be the first meeting without me. No, I'm just kidding on that. Mostly because Squires will need time to draft the legislation. And then if we do have it on a third, if there's anything that they need to fix, that gives us at least the 4th to fix anything.
Then Mr. Haberger, it would be correct that I would need a motion from this commission to bring that legislation before us at a special meeting with the intent of placing these charter amendments on the ballot this November. Is that correct?
Yes, or just a simple motion to set the special meeting for Monday at 5, if you guys just, if that's best for everybody, or whatever you guys choose.
I will ask for a motion to set a special meeting for Monday, August the 3rd, that would be, would it not?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole.
I'll need to be excused from that meeting. I will not be in town. So you have enough to do, but I won't be here.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Poole. Additional discussion? Ms. Briggs, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer.
Yes.
That motion is approved, and that meeting is set for 5 p.m. on August the 3rd. And I want to, while we still have Mr. Milkey on line, hopefully we do, and anyone else that's listening, I want to extend my deep gratitude for the work that they've performed on this Charter Review Committee. It took a lot of courage and a lot of your time, your 15 members time to bring us these recommendations. We all, I hope, have kept in mind that our approval of these certainly does not guarantee approval by the voters. The last voice in all of this ends up being the electorate. So they deserve to have and will have the final say in all of these. But Mr. Milkey, we thank you for your leadership, and we thank every one of your 15 members on that committee for the time and effort that they put into this. We owe you a debt of gratitude and them a debt of gratitude. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. President, thank you, and on behalf of the Charter Committee, we appreciate the opportunity to provide service to the city, and we thank you for all your ongoing efforts as we continue to progress as a community going forward, and we're happy to be a small part of that progress. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Have a good evening. Ms. Spriggs, are there any communications from residents to be read?
Yes, Mr. President, there are. I will get started. I believe that we have 4. The first is from Ms. Sharon Johnson. Back in 2014, the income tax and admissions tax were increased, but it seems that was not enough for the city. The commissioners claim they knew nothing about what the city manager and the lobbyists were up to when they asked the state representative to increase the income tax by 0.5% without voters' approval. An email is indicating that at least one commissioner knew about the request. Even though the lobbyist expenditure was under the $10,000 limit, there was a contract involved that needed approval by the commissioners. Both the city manager and the lobbyist are well aware of their professional boundaries. There should be some accountability rather than a slap on the hand. To restore some kind of trust, I ask that the commissioners restore checks and balances by placing the city attorney and the finance director back under the 7 commissioners. In addition, the $50,000 increase in expenses as a charter amendment should not be placed on the ballot in November. The city is in a financial crisis, and the amendment would allow more spending to go unchecked. The next item is from Marie Hawk. She requested this be read. As a resident of Sandusky, I spent more time in the past couple years observing what is going on in our city government. I watch many of the commission meetings to get an idea how city issues are being handled. First of all, I am appalled at the attempt to saddle us with more income tax without going to the voters. I appreciate the commissioners who spoke against this and brought this issue out for the public to see what kind of administrator we have. Also, if the commission is so concerned about looking to the future, why are so many agenda items passed as emergency legislation? I believe this emergency legislation process is being abused when passing items that are truly not an emergency. If so many of these items are truly emergencies, then something needs to be done so that these items come before the commission in a more timely manner. My opinion is the city has too many administrative and assistant administrative positions and too few working positions. Working is in quotes. Any further position cuts or salary cuts should come only from the administrative and assistant administrative positions. Thank you. The next is from Mr. Thomas Lamarca. He said, the Mylander Pavilion building, having been recently completed for nearly $1 million, is to be made available for daily rentals. However, there's no information on the doors giving contact information or pricing. I would guess that your market study for the needs of this building also gave you the anticipated daily rate schedule and annual revenue projections. I think a simple, in quote, for rental information, call 419-627-XXX stenciled on the doors windows would have a nice start. Are we going to use COVID as an excuse not to rent this property? Question mark. And then lastly, from Mr. Tim Schwanger, the relocating of the dumpster at the end of Meg Street adjacent to the Sandusky Bay Pavilion has been discussed at 2 Coffee with Commissioners meetings and has not been addressed. It is not clear if the city or Sandusky Bay Development owns the dumpster. Driving and looking north on Meg Street, the location of the dumpster is not eye-appealing. If it belongs to Sandusky Bay Development, it should be moved to their property. If it belongs to the city, it should be moved further west. That concludes our public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs. Mr. Webster, would you see that those questions are appropriately answered by the appropriate staff?
Yes, Commissioner Brady.
Thank you. I have been attempting to lure Commission Clerk Kresser down to the chambers unsuccessfully. Is she in the hallway? You will have to grab her. This is Commission Clerk Kresser's last official City Commission meeting. After spending 33 years as an employee of this city, she's leaving us to go to a much higher calling, and that is being a grandmother. I am about to wish her well. I hope that she will allow us to do that. Aha. Ms. Kresser, I wonder if you'd approach, please. I can't remember the last time I gave a female flowers. Please don't tell my wife that.
I think she knows.
These are from all of us. Thank you. And in addition to that, I have something else inside this little bag for you that you've seen only a very few times. After 33 years of service, you certainly deserve that.
Give her the champagne.
Oh,
That's a private someday.
Mr. Waddick is providing you with champagne. I want you to have that.
Thank you very much.
None of us are certain what that key opens in the city. We always struggle with exactly what that is. But I can tell you that you have opened a lot of doors for us.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. It's been a great career. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
Before Kelly runs away, Kelly, sorry I couldn't be there today, but I just want to first extend my congratulations for your years of service and then your decision to retire. I am elated for you. I will miss you, but I will be calling you from time to time. But I just want to say a little bit about how I met Kelly. And I was applying for one of the boards at the city level. Actually, it was a charter review committee. And Kelly was so informative because I was a little hesitant about whether I wanted to apply or not. And just appreciate her openness, her approachableness, her fine representation as the face of the commission, as the commission clerk. There have been many conversations that she and I have had over the years, and I just appreciate her work, her dedication, and her commitment to the city of Sandusky and to her job. But again, I am extremely happy for her in her next phase of her life, being a grandma and being able to help and assist in the raising of her grandchild. There's nothing better to retire for than something like that. So I wish you all the best, Kelly, all the blessings to you and your family, and we will be talking soon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Commissioner Murray. You were done. Commissioner Murray.
I simply wanted to say, Kelly, thank you for going so far above and beyond the role of clerk. Now, you've been an ambassador to the city of Sandusky. You've been an ambassador for the commission. That's not part of the job description, but you made it part of the job description. and you've represented us so well. Dick Brady said it earlier. It was in the paper, I think. He said, you make us all look better than we deserve, and that's true. But beyond that, you were for me, for the 6 years that I held the gavel, you were a great counselor. You were never afraid to say, "No, wait a minute, Dennis. You don't want to do that. That's a really stupid idea." And there are only two people I take that from. One is Naomi Twine, and one is Kelly Cresser. The other people that I say, well, I'm going to go ahead and do the stupid idea anyway. I have a lot of stupid ideas, but that's just the way it goes. But you're a great counselor, and thank you for that and for your friendship. And we all wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Waddington.
Kelly, I'd like to thank you. I'm going to miss, who do I call now? 3 or 4, sometimes 5 times a week. You always responded and said, I'll get back with you, and I appreciate that. I'm probably the longest commissioner that you've served with. I'm in my 13th year, so I'm pretty sure there's not too many more done that. And you've always been upfront, and I could always trust, your opinion. You'd say, no, don't do this or whatever, and then I'd think about it. You were right, so I appreciate that. Thank you again for your service. Good luck to you. It's fun being retired, I can tell you.
Right.
All right.
Mr. President.
Commissioner Meiser.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kelly, I think I got wide. I started in the 70s, and I remember Kelly coming in as a young lady. So she's kept me on track and kept me getting to appointments and meetings and agendas, like everything throughout my career. She's really, Marge did it first. Marge left, worked for Mr. Link. Kelly took over for Marge. I can't see her smile because she has a mask on. Because I always remind her about she's now Marge and Mackenzie's the new Marge, and that was the first person I worked for. So it's amazing how 37 years go by so fast in the blink of an eye. But you're still one of my neighbors and one of our friends, and thank you for keeping me on schedule and getting to the right place at the right time throughout my career.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Harris.
Yes, there's really not much more I can add to it other than, I certainly do echo much of the same as my fellow commissioners. All I can simply say is just that, here in my short time and as I embarked on this journey, Kelly, you have done nothing but made this transition as easy and as pleasant as possible. And so I thank you for being that of like a mother to me. And you are certainly a person that I've grown to love is just that. And but you have such an amazing spirit, and I just I wish you the best on your next journey, and may it bring you nothing but love and fulfillment. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Gentlemen, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Elevator.
So moved. Find the bar. Shut her down.
Not yet, right?
That was like Ubu Productions at the end there.
We're done?
Yeah, we're done.
Oh,
We good?
come on, man. Hold on.